So if you look at geopolitical literature, something that's talked about a lot is, you look at economic strengths and weaknesses of all the countries, you look at their geography, and one of the topics is a potential Russian-German alliance. So if NATO, let's say the United States is no longer interested in NATO and they retreat from being the security guarantor of Europe, the logic for the European Union would basically fall apart. See, people would argue that, well, the European Union is a very entrenched set of institutions, there's institutions around that are very much entrenched. And you look at something like Brexit, right? And the trouble that the UK is going through right now, trying to separate from the European Union. However, another way to look at it is that institutions exist because there's some power behind that allows it to exist. In other words, the power behind the institutions is what makes institutions possible. And without the United States being the security guarantor of Europe, what logic is there to be a European Union, right? If all the countries are not on the same side militarily, therefore they'll start to pursue their own national interests. You have conflicting national interests between, say, France and Germany, and say Poland and Germany, etc. So going back to the Russia-Germany issue, historically Germany and Russia have been enemies and they've been been allies at various times. Economically, it actually makes sense for them to be allies. Russia has an abundance of natural resources. They have massive amounts of farmland. They have fuel. They have all the base materials like coal, iron, cobalt, etc., that an industrial country needs. Germany doesn't really have much of any of these things. So they have to import all this to keep their industry running. Germany has an expertise in industry, engineering, manufacturing finished goods. Russia lacks this because during the Soviet Union, it turns out it's not very efficient in producing technology. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia suffered a massive brain drain. So they don't have the engineers that they need to run their massive country. As it turns out, they had to import a lot of Western technology to make their agricultural sector be efficient and to produce the massive amount of foods that they do today, to make a lot of their drilling, like oil drilling projects possible, because a lot of these are in the Arctic, they're hard to get to, and it requires expertise that required Western technology to do. Now, since the Ukrainian war, because of the sanctions, a lot of Western technology has been difficult to get in there. So Russia, in the long term, would suffer issues trying to maintain their current levels of production. However, if let's say the European Union falls apart and there's a partnership between Russia and Germany, that would solve a lot of their economic problems. Germany would have all the natural resources that they need in exchange for the technological ability to extract them from Russia. Russia would obviously benefit from that. So such a partnership would make a lot of sense. To do that, you'd have to have a complete dissolution of NATO, which would probably happen anyway if the United States doesn't care anymore, if they're retreating from Europe, which there's some indication that is happening. And of course, without Germany, you don't have a European Union, you don't have a NATO. So this makes sense in a lot of ways. It's not without its problems, obviously, but that is a very real possibility. Even despite the problems that are going on right now with the sanctions and the rhetoric and the fact that a lot of the components for the drones that the Ukrainians are using against the Russians are made in Germany, despite all those things, despite the threats coming from Russia, there's a bit of logic that all of that might be swept under the rug and you might get a partnership between Russia and Germany sometime in the future.